Hi, Primary 3 students, this is Miss Stephanie, and today I've made a little video lesson for you which is about prepositions. Okay, so I hope you watched the PowerPoint before. So please take a look at these 9 students that are in the P3 class. Okay, let's take a look at all of them. We have Kitty, Cherry, Tom, Billy, Sally, May, Sam, Sarah, and Eddie. And then, do you know who is at the front of the class? Yes, it's me, Miss Stephanie, in my P3 class. Okay, so please take a look at where they are sitting. We are going to talk about some prepositions. Okay, the first one. Do you remember we used the preposition between when we are talking about someone who sits in the middle? So take a look at Sally. Here's Sally, she's here. What can we say about Sally? We can say Sally sits between May and Billy. Sally sits between May and Billy. All right, how about Cherry? Can you make the sentence for me? Cherry sits between Kitty and Tom. Good job. All right, now let's look at the front row. How about Sarah? Okay, your turn. Can you make the sentence about Sarah? Okay, ready, go. Sarah sits between Sam and Eddie. Wow, good job. So this is between. Okay, next one we are going to do you remember? We are going to do behind. Behind. So let's take a look at Kitty. Here's Kitty. Kitty sits behind May. So remember, if you sit behind someone, if you look forward, you can see them. So Kitty, she can see May. Kitty sits behind May. Okay, let's look at someone else. Okay, Billy. Who does Billy sit behind? Billy sits behind Eddie. Yes, good job. Billy sits behind Eddie. And remember, we need to say sits with the S at the end when we talk about other people, our friends. Okay, so that's behind. Okay, I asked you a question. Who sits behind Sarah? Who sits behind Sarah? Do you know the answer? It should be Sally. Sally sits behind Sarah. Okay, next one. Who sits behind Billy? Who sits behind Billy? Tom. Tom sits behind Billy. Okay, and the next one, do you remember? Should be in front of. In front of. Okay, so let me see. Let's look at Sam. This is Sam. Okay, Sam sits in front of May. Sarah sits in front of Sally. Remember, when the person sits in the front, they cannot see the person who is behind them. Do you remember this from the PowerPoint? So Sam sits in front of May. Sarah sits in front of Sally. And who sits in front of Billy? Eddie. Eddie sits in front of Billy. And don't forget, you can also use next to describe who is sitting near you. For example, May sits next to Sally. Sarah sits next to Eddie. Cherry sits next to Tom. Okay, now I'm going to ask you a few questions. Let's have a practice and see if you can make the sentence to answer my question. Okay? So, who sits next to May? Who sits next to May? Sally. Sally sits next to May. Okay, let's do a few more practices. So, can you answer these questions for me? Who sits in front of Sally? Who sits in front of Sally? Sarah. Sarah sits in front of Sally. Okay, next one. Who sits behind May? Who sits behind May? Kitty. Should be Kitty. Kitty sits behind May. All right, next one. Who sits between Kitty and Tom? Who sits between Kitty and Tom? Do you know the answer? Who sits between Kitty and Tom? It should be Cherry. She sits between Kitty and Tom. Remember, between is in the middle, right? Okay, let's do 3 more. Who sits behind Eddie? Who sits behind Eddie? Billy. Billy sits behind Eddie. Good job. All right, next one. Who sits in front of May? Who sits in front of May? Can you see who sits in front of May? It should be Sam. Sam sits in front of May. All right, last one. Who sits behind... Who sits behind Sarah? Who sits behind Sarah? Should be Sally. Sally sits behind Sarah. Okay, so you can watch this very, very simple video again to learn about these prepositions between, behind, in front of, and next to. Okay, say goodbye to Miss Stephanie at the front of the class. Goodbye.